All right, in this video, we're going to talk about best practices for students performing the labs, right? So again, this is a series of videos just trying to help people maybe find some new approaches to helping students go through the test out material. There's so many things they can do with test out. It's an incredible product, and I've been using it for years. But there are some challenges, right? Especially at the high school level, which I taught for 12 years. Um, at the college level, again, you can assign work and they're paying for the class and it's their responsibility to go through it. But at the high school level, it can be very challenging. And the labs are another thing that there's different approaches. What I'm going to say is my approach that I used. I felt it was very successful. The proof is in the pudding. We got hundreds of kids certified, and lots of students who went through the program are working in the IT field, being very successful careers at a very young age, even. So, so I feel like what we did was very positive. But again, I'm open for any type of input about maybe some other alternatives. But anyway, so here you go. We're going to talk about some what I feel are some good lab practices. Okay. So we're going to do it. We're going to talk about the three approaches that are kind of common right now. There's the in-person delivery, which is hopefully coming back very soon, and the online delivery, which is still kind of dominant right now. I've done both, obviously, and then the hybrid, which I've also done, where we have students in the classroom and also online, which again is another great reason why TestOut is such a valuable tool, right? It gives us that ability to be so flexible, especially with like transient students that maybe have issues with being in school all the time. I used to have a problem with that when I was at my high school, that we were a Title I school, and some of our students would be taken out to help with the family with work and things like that, and they would leave for a while, and it was not their fault. They had no choice. And TestOut is just this great tool to be able to make sure that they stay up to with the other classmates. So very cool. Okay, so let's take a look at the problems. Students will not do the labs, just straight out won't do them. I mean, it happens, right? Sometimes students will come in and for some reason they just don't feel like the labs are something that they want to get through. I don't know. It happens, right? Students don't see the value in the labs. So this is one that is really one that I've seen before. And so it's very important that we convey the importance of the labs, right? And I'm going to talk about that more in a few minutes, but sometimes the students just don't understand why they have to do these, and you know, we'll talk about that in a minute. Students get frustrated doing the labs and don't complete them. That's another thing about the labs that can be challenging. Some of the labs, because it's a simulation and not a virtualization where you have total, access to the entire, maybe the operating systems or other things that students kind of get used to, a certain way of doing things. Although TestStat is doing a much better job of coming up with ways to be able to facilitate different ways of approaching a lab instead of and when TestStat was first, when I was first using it, they kind of had a very structured way of doing things, and if you didn't follow that structure, then you would not pass the exam or the lab. And so students were like, "So see, I do it this way," and I was like, "Well, I know you do it that way, but you need to do it the test that way." But now they've done a really good job of altering things so the students can have alternate ways of like opening up something or changing a setting on a window. So but they can be frustrating, and the students, after a while will get, stop wanting to do them. So we're going to talk about how we can get around that. Students start the lab, hit grade, and then just follow the steps. Okay, so which is again, sometimes the students will get frustrated, so they'll just score it. They see the instructions of how to carry out the lab. They go through the instructions and they're done, and they grade themselves, right? But they're not really doing the lab with purpose, right? The thing about the labs for test out is there's a purpose for doing the lab, and if the student doesn't understand the purpose, how it relates to learning the material, then they're just going to go through it. So and it'll have no effect on them other than the fact that they completed it, right? Students spend too much time on the lab and they don't complete other parts of the assignment. So I have had situations where there's certain labs in certain features of test out that the students will just they'll spend hours trying to complete it, and it becomes like a challenge for these students. Like I'm gonna complete this lab no matter what, and they you'll try over and over and over. And I've assigned like several labs to be done that day or that evening for homework, and they obsess over this one lab until they finally get it done, but they don't do anything else. So that is another issue. So these are just problems that I've seen in the past. I'm sure there's many, many more that other people can add to this list. But again, these are just a few that pretty much probably everybody has seen. Okay, so what have I tried in my room in the past, right? So I have done, when I first started using TestOut, I saw the value of the tool, but not understanding how to use the tool was the problem, right? So assign the labs to be done in class and expect them to just go through them, right? So that's just, hey, go do lab 6.23, go do it, have a nice day, right? Just go assign them. Assign the labs, but tell them if you can't get through the whole thing, it's okay. So now and I was very guilty of this, right? I would tell the students, try your best. Go do lab 6.2.4. And if you can't get through the whole lab, that's okay. Score it. If you get an 80 or a 75, that's fine. Don't worry about it. That was a bad idea, right? Because then they're like, okay, well, I can just go through it, do whatever I want. If I don't pass it, who cares? Again, a bad message. And so, I learned from that mistake. Put students into teams and have them work together to complete labs. Now, this one is an interesting one because I mentioned it in another video about how to watch the videos and how I team students up, and I felt it was a bad idea. But the labs are a little bit different. Pairing two students up to do a lab may not be a bad thing as long as you really monitor it really well, making sure that one student is not just dominating everything, although it will happen anyway. But what I'm a big believer in pairing, pairing up a strong student and a weaker student so they can, the weaker student can, and the strong student can help the weaker student. So I'm a big fan of pairing, and I do it in ways that the student doesn't feel like that's happening to them, like they're not a weak student, the other one's a strong student. I try really hard to make sure that it feels very random, but it's never random. But it's I'm a big fan of teaming. I like especially near the test prep days. I think I mentioned this on the other video, but I separate my year into two parts. One part is just learning the material, right? Just every day the labs, the videos, my lectures, everything is that, and then and then I shift gears into a test prep mode so that we can prepare for the certification test. So very clear, defining points of one starts and ends, the other one starts and ends. So again, so I like to do that, assigning students together in teams. Assignments for homework. So I used to assign labs only for homework, and I didn't do them in class, right? So I did most of my lecturing and other things and assessments and things like that in class. But the labs, I would give them for homework. I say, everybody, guys, tonight do these labs, right? Again, I don't think it worked very well. Uh, Only the kids who were really into it did well, but the kids who were kind of teeter-tottering between really maybe falling in love with it and not falling in love with it were, it didn't help them, right? And only use TestOut Labs, right? So there was a time when I only used TestOut Labs in certain situations. Uh, and TestOut is a wonderful tool. And if you only have access, if you don't have any access to hardware or any other equipment, then TestOut is a great way to fill that gap. But if you do have some other equipment, I'm going to talk about that. So just hold on tight on that one. Okay, so what seemed to work for me, right? So again, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have found really good success on a method they've developed, and I am totally cool with you not using any of my methodologies. It won't hurt my feelings. It worked for me. It may not work for everyone, but this is what I found worked for me, right? So for one thing, I would print out the instructions to the labs, right? So I would start a lab, I would just grade it, I would go into the output showing the steps, I would copy all that into a document along with other pieces. I'm going to show you an example of something I would have created for a class, right? And I would have that available to the students, right? So again, I would print out all the instructions. And then I would go through the lab with the class using a projector, right? So just like I did with the videos, right? I would put the lab on the big projector screen. The students would gather around, and we would walk through the lab together. Sometimes I would even get a student to actually do the lead. Remember I showed you my little keyboard that I used in my classroom? This little keyboard is a very cool tool. I could hand it to a student, and most of my students, um, because I would, they would get used to it. It takes a little practice with this little keyboard, but after a while, the students got used to being able to handle it. And I would have a student walk through it, and I would talk through it, just so I can get that kind of interaction. Again, anything that breaks up the normalness of a day, right? Just so the kids can, focus better. So we put it on the screen and we go through the lab, right? Using the instructions, right? I don't mind. I mean, I didn't know how to do all the labs either, right? Of course, I would go through the labs before, so I shouldn't say that. I always went through the labs the night before. Nothing worse than going through, being, spontaneous and trying to do something without any preparation. I'm a big fan of preparation, preparation, preparation. Okay, so after we go through the lab, the students use the printed document, right? So now if you have a problem with printed documents and you feel like you have a paper shortage. That happened in our school. We had a big paper shortage for a while. So luckily, I just created PDFs of all of these documents and put them in our LMS. We used a Moodle, and when I was at school, excuse me. So I put them in Moodle. The kids could download them onto their computers in a PDF format and just have it on the screen. So that way, if you don't want to waste paper, but I'm a big paper fan, and so I usually would print them out, right? And I would allow the students, even after I went through it on the screen, I would allow the students to use the instructions for their first pass. Now, of course, I had some students who didn't want to do it. They would see me do it on the screen. They're like, "I can do that, Mr. C. Go do it," and they would go do it without even needing that sheet anymore. But some students still needed that sheet, and I was like, "No, don't stress about it. Go through it with a sheet. I want you to understand why we're doing this lab, right? This lab is going to reinforce this information that I'm trying to teach you, right? And that's the beauty of TestOut, right? It's covering as many ways, learning methods as possible, right? The doers, the listeners, the readers, right? And I've felt this for years and years and years. I've been, every time I talk to teachers and groups and stuff, I tell them, and you all know this, as many different ways a student can do something to reach a goal, right? So again, you need to take that feeling of like I don't know what I'm doing out of the picture, because that just adds more stress. Learning is already stressful, and so taking that out of it helps the student learn, right? So they get the first pass, right? And then I tell them do it again without the paper, right? So do it with the paper, do it slowly, go through it, and then turn the paper over, try it again without the paper, right? And so that way it really gets them to learn the skill, and they relate it to the topic of what I'm trying to get them to learn, right? So, and if they get stuck, they just reference it, right? Now, so one of the biggest things that you can do for your students for the labs is to convey to them the importance of the skill, right? So I used to always tell my students, skills pay the bills, right? That's what I used to tell my students. Skills pay the bills, right? And so one of the things that is one of the biggest problems I feel that is out there for IT is and certifications is that a lot of people will go onto brain dumps. They'll learn how to, they'll study these brain dumps of the questions on the test. They'll go take these exams. They'll pass them because they're just essentially just reading the questions from these brain dumps. And then they think they're IT tech people, right? They think they are, right? But they can't do anything, right? They don't know how to do, if you ask them to convert, configure a switch with VLANs or give an IP address to a router, to install a service on a server or do something in Linux or in Microsoft Office, right? They won't be able to do it because all they know is the test, right? So so I used to always tell my students, don't be a paper tech, right? Don't be a paper tech. A paper tech is someone who's got the cert but can't do anything. And I can spot those people a mile away. When I was a manager at one time in my past life, you could really tell the people who could get their hands dirty and do the work, and the people that had a good topical understanding of something, but if you asked them to do anything, they were pretty much useless, right? So that's what the labs do for us, right? They give us that edge on over other people that maybe don't have access to test out or even hardware to be able to learn how to do something, right? So I used to preach that all the time. Skills pay the bills, and had a big sign on the wall, right? Now, the next thing I'm going to say maybe is not really something that a lot of people can can do because of limits in budgets or access to stuff. But if you can actually duplicate the lab with actual hardware in your room some way. Now, again, I don't think it's that important, that you do this, but if you can, it's just another way of just, getting that information into the students, right? Okay, so here's a question I get all the time from teachers who call me for advice. Do I do all the labs? Okay, so here we go. It depends. Am I training for certification or am I not training for certification? Right? To me, that's how you break it up. Are you going to try to get these kids certified, whether it's the TestOut certifications or the industry standard certifications? If you are focusing on getting these students certified, there's one approach. If you're not doing that, if you're for some reason you're teaching these classes as an elective and it's supposed to be fun and it's just a way of getting the students to understand computers and stuff like that, and you're not focusing on certifications, which is cool, then let's talk about that. Okay, so if training for certification and you have a short time frame, one semester to teach, a very substantial subject, then what I would do is I would focus on the labs that reinforce the objectives. Okay. In other words, if the lab doesn't reinforce an objective, then don't do it. Just pass on it. Right. And one thing about TestOut, they give you a lot of great labs, but some of them aren't really things that are objective focused. They're just really good things to know how to do. Right. Which I think is great. Right. But if your time is constrained, right, and you are really having to do a lot in information, then the lectures and the fact sheets should be your focus because you need to get these kids with all the information they need to prepare for the test, right? And then the labs are kind of secondary, but I still believe you should do labs, but as long as they're again objective focused, right? And you can see them. You'll know which ones they are. If you go through the labs, you can see the ones that are very objective focused and the ones that are just kind of like, these are fun to do and very good to know, but you could probably pass on them, right? So if you're training for certification, but you have a longer time frame, well, include more labs, right? Now, I was lucky, right? Most of my entry class, so I used to teach like the computer maintenance classes, my basic networking classes, those classes were usually a whole year. They were my freshman and sophomore classes, right? But as I got to the higher end classes, like my Cisco certification classes, my security cyber classes, my Linux classes, those usually were broken up into one semester. So again, it's a different approach. When I had the whole year, I would do all the labs. I like to do all the labs. Again, if you have a system that the students don't suffer and it's not arduous for the student to go through things, then do them and have fun with it because it's again, it's another way to break up the day. It makes the students more interested, and if you sell them right as being valuable, then the kids will get into it, right? But if you don't have that time, again, then you have to pick and choose. So I included more labs because I think that's important. We don't want those paper techs, right? Now, another thing is test prep time. So remember, like I said, I break the year into two parts. During test prep, which is usually my last 4 to 8 weeks of the school year, or that period for if it's a one semester class, the last 4 weeks of the one semester class, then I don't do any labs during that time other than maybe something for a review, which is onesie twosie labs, right? Everything should be videos, lecturing on review and fact sheets and any other resources you use in your class. Labs are really kind of those are done. You should have done them earlier in the year, right? During test prep time, very few labs were done in my room other than maybe a reinforcement, something I need the students to do, like, binary conversion or something like that, where they're IP address assigning or something like that, so they get used to IP config and those commands. But again, I would pick and choose very specific ones, okay? If you're not training for certification, do whatever you want. I mean, just do all the labs, do everything, have fun, build stuff. I've never been able to do that. Every class I've ever had was certification focused because, now this is just my opinion. You can take it or leave it. I don't think there should be an IT class that doesn't have a certification focus on it. I don't understand why there would be, other than maybe some maybe junior high class. Of course, they're so young, and freshman classes, some of them are pretty young too. But as far as anything upper level, then certifications are really, I think, should be the focus because it keeps your class at a very high level, right? The objectives for these tests are very, very high level, and they're very rigorous exams. And if that's your goal, then you're always teaching at a very high level. Okay, so online delivery, I did the same thing, right? Even though we were online, I would put the video on the screen, and I would walk through it together with the students talking about the steps. I would have PDFs. They would have them on their side through their learning management system. So essentially, I did everything the same way. Nothing changed for my online delivery other than the fact that, of course, they're doing it online. Now, as far as the hardware, actual hardware labs, now, I actually did have access to hardware. So we didn't just do test out labs, which I love. We also did real hardware labs on real routers and switches and computers and servers. And the way I would do it is the student will be at home, right? So this is a student at home. They would be connected to the internet, right? Then at my school, there was another computer that was connected to the rack of hardware, right? These would be routers, switches, and servers, right? And what I would do is have the students, now again, this is if they're doing actual hardware labs. If you're just doing test out, then don't listen to this. I would just show the lab on the screen and we would walk through it and the students would do it. But if you do incorporate hardware and if they're not in the class, you can have them remote into the school computer, right? Using several options out there to remote into a device, team viewer. A lot of people say it's not secure, but again, if as long as you have the remote in, do the work, and then shut the computer and turn off TeamViewer, then you're cool. I mean, don't have it on all the time with TeamViewer on, but if you have it during those times, then you're pretty safe, right? And then once they remote in the computer, then they have access to the hardware. Okay, and that's how I did it in my class at the college level. They would remote into the devices, and then from the device in the school, they could control all the router switches and servers that I had access to. So that is a way to do both hardware and test out labs. Okay. And the hybrid, the same thing with the hybrid. Everything I just said, just ditto, right? Have them remote in. They can control the devices there locally through remoting into a local computer at the school, and then test out just demoing the same way I did, even if they were sitting there in the room. So it works just fine. Okay. So again, this is for the people that have who want to maybe do both test out and other labs if you have the time. Now, this is the thing, if you have the time. If you don't have time, then I would say focus on test out. It's perfectly suited for that type of getting a student at a high level, right? But what I would do is I would duplicate the test out labs inside with actual hardware. We have old computers we could tear apart, put them back together. I would most districts, if they're in a larger district, they will have they'll be cycling their routers and switches and servers out of commission once the warranty goes out, and sometimes they'll make them available to IT classes. I was very lucky. I had good relationship with our IT at school's IT department, and I used to tell them, if you're throwing something away, call me right away. I'll come pick it up. Don't even, just let me know about it. And they were always cool about, hey, Johnny, I've got a couple of servers I'm decommissioning. You want them? Yes, I will be right over, right? So, make sure you get to know those IT people because they're also going to need their input to be able to do certain labs in your room. And I'm going to talk about them in a second. So, okay. Another thing is out there, and I'm just going to say this, right? There's a thing called Packet Tracer. I'm going to whisper it, right? Packet Tracer. And I did use Packet Tracer in my room to duplicate test out labs and duplicate my own custom labs that I would create. Because test out is great, but they sometimes don't have certain things that I want to be able to achieve. So I would build them out in Packet Tracer. It's a good tool for that, and it's free, right? Even though I know I work for test out, but teachers need access to everything that makes it, that they can use to get their students successful. So, I'm not going to just say that our product is perfect. There's no such thing. I'm not perfect. Nothing's perfect, right? Again, find old PCs and laptops, dual boot them, and have Linux on the dual boot, maybe another in a Windows version, so you have dual booted. I used to have these old laptops that the district was getting rid of. They were going to trash them, so I got them, and they were perfectly good to run Linux on, especially like Lubuntu. Lubuntu is a real stripped down version of Ubuntu. It's called Lubuntu. It's like Ubuntu Lite, and it fits on just any computer can run it pretty much, right? So it's a really good version. You can use CentOS, obviously, if you a Red Hat Focus, it's a great one, or just good old-fashioned Ubuntu. And then, of course, Windows. Another resource, I put a link here to a resource to download server versions of Windows. For those of you who are looking for that, there's 180-day trial versions for all the different server versions at this site. And again, I was a big fan of just trial versions because they give you 30 to 180 days to just try it, and usually the amount of time I needed was like 2 or 3 weeks. So it'd be easy within the time frame of the trial, right? And that way you can use some servers, and I would put server versions on even laptops or computers with 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, even 4 gigs of RAM. They would run slow, but they would be able to do certain tasks. You would still be able to create web servers out of them with Windows, and of course with Linux. I mean, that's plenty for a Linux server, right? And another thing is, so here we go. So with a lot of people, students or teachers will say, Johnny, my IT department doesn't let me do these things because they don't want the students to be on the network, right? And they'll do things on the network. They're going to break the network, or they're going to hack into the network, right? So I hear this a lot. So one way to get around it is to create your own closed network within your class network, right? So one of the easiest ways to do this is by purchasing these little USB Ethernet devices. Okay, so you don't have to open the computer if you're using mostly laptops on your network. Then these work great because what these allow you to do is have a second Ethernet card without having to open the computer and put things in it. Especially if you're not allowed to, right? Because I hear those all the time. Well, I'm not allowed to do these things, right? And that's cool. But what this does is it gives you another Ethernet device which you can build your internal private closed network with these devices, and that's what I would do, right? And they work great, especially if you're running Windows 10. You plug them in and they just work, right? And so these are a good way so that you can hook up one computer to another computer. And so what ends up happening is you have your computer. So let's say it's a computer, a desktop computer, or even if it's a laptop, right? Doesn't matter. So that the laptop is wireless, that's cool. And if the desktop is connected to the regular infrastructure, right, RJ45s to the school network, when you plug in this little device, now you have another Ethernet device. And if you plug it into a laptop, it has an Ethernet device, and you can connect them together and do little point-to-point networks. The kids can practice pinging each other. They can run Wireshark labs to see the data traveling between the two computers, right? If you have some switches and routers, then you can put them in between all this and build their networks based on these little devices. So these are really great ways to make really simple closed networks, and that way you can assign IP addresses, and the kids can still be on the internet because they're still connected to the school network, and they're just using these to connect to this little private network. Now, here's the thing real quick. I'm going to say this. Sometimes when you ping, right, and because you have two devices, the ping is going to try to go out the main device. So this is Johnny's advice, take it or leave it. If you see this problem, right, let's say I have a computer that I have my little device like I'm showing you here, right? And then I have my other connection to the school network, right? To the school network. Swap them. Connect this to the school network and then use this connection to build your closed network. Okay, that way it's the main device, right? The internal device will be seen as the dominant device, right? Now you can disable it, but then you lose your internet connection, which is another reason why you need this second device. I could disconnect it and build the closed network, but then the kids are going to have to reassign IP addresses, and the district's not going to let them to do that. So again, these are really great little devices to do closed networks. Okay. So what I want to do now is go through a quick lab and demonstrate how I would teach a lab in the classroom using my projector. Okay, so here's the first thing I do. Remember, first thing I do is I create a document. So what this document will be is it'll have the number of the lab. It's going to have instructions on the lab, what the goal is, and then I paste the actual steps, right? So I paste the steps in there. And then I have any type of images from the lab that are going to help with the lab. So this would be, I'm going to show you the lab this was brought from. I created this last night, and just paste it in there and any other pictures you have. And this is what I'm going to give the kids, right? And I'll have a copy of it too, because I'm going to go through the lab together with them and I can highlight it. So very cool. And then let's go ahead and bring up the lab. So this is the lab that document is based off of. I just copy and paste the stuff into a Microsoft Word or some other editor, and then um, I go through the lab. I just grade it. I copy the results and put them in the document. And again, anything else. So let's go into the lab real quick. Alrighty, and I picked this lab because it's a pretty common lab, and this actually is from the ITF course, the IT Fundamentals course in TestOut. So that's where I got this. Again, here's the scenario. Again, all of this is pasted at the top of the document. That's just right there at the very top of the document. The exact same thing that's right here in the scenario. Right now, this is another thing I'll tell you. I go through the labs before I give them to the student because I want to see what can I do with this lab that maybe I can actually add. So this is the problem with most of the time when you just assign the kids to do a lab and without instruction, right? They just follow they go and they click around and things don't work and they get frustrated and. So as a teacher, for me, what I used to do is I used to go into the lab and see what is available to me. What can I do, right? What can I add to this lab so that this lab is even more of a teaching a moment, right, for the students, right? So just by looking at this lab, right? So this is Office 1, right? So if I click on the floor view, right, we see the office. We have Office 2, so the students know, okay, I'm working on this computer here, right? This is the computer I'm working on. And then there's a server over here. Wow, this is fun. Let's see if I can get into this server. Again, I do this at night, right? So I click on this and I look at, oh, look, they're running the server. This is a server version, of the operating system, right? And if I look over here on the dashboard, I see that this is running Hyper-V. It's running print services. It's a file server. So that's kind of cool. So then I go back to my floor plan, right? I'm in Office 1 computer. Again, just kind of looking at some things, right? Let's get back into the computer, okay? Let's see if I can get into my command prompt. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to type in CMD, right? And I can go to the command prompt. That's kind of cool, right? So let me go back up here real quick, right? So that's cool. Let's see if I can run ipconfig. Okay, so here we go. And it runs, and okay, very cool. And look at that. You see what I see? There's an APIPA. Oh my goodness. There's an APIPA. There's a learning opportunity, right? So obviously this computer was set to DHCP and it can't communicate with it, or maybe the server's gone down or something. And the scenario even says, if you read it, right, the device is configured for DHCP, but the DHCP server has not been implemented, right? So there we go. So that's why it has an APIPA, right? The DHCP server isn't up yet, which means we have to give this computer a static IP address, right? So very cool, right? But look, there's an opportunity to see a PIPA, which is pretty not easy to do in your lab because, if you disconnect a computer, it's not going to give itself an PIPA. It's just not going to have a network connection. So again, another learning opportunity, right? You know what? Let me bring this back. Oops, this is not what I wanted. Sorry about that. Let me close that. Hit the wrong one, right? So let me get, here. So now let's go ahead and follow the lab. So the lab is, so remember I have the lab on the PDF. I also have it on my screen here. So remember, I'm a big fan of OneNote. So these would be the steps that they're asking me to follow, just to set the IP address. Again, I would follow the steps exactly like this on the lab with the students, but I would also maybe alter the lab a little bit and show the kids an alternate way to go there. So they're actually telling you to go here and type in network settings, right? And network and sharing, right? Or network settings, view network connections, and they're asking you to go this way. But there's also another way to do it. You could go down here to the bottom of this screen and click on the little computer down here, go network. So I'm showing them an alternate way, right? Again, always trying to show the kids there's always more than one way to do anything. There's Ethernet, right? Change adapter options, and then right click and then go properties. And again, now the first time I did this lab, I would be following the steps exactly like this. That way the students can see it go through the lab. But then I'm showing them alternate ways, right? Again, always trying to get the students to know that there's more than one way to do anything. Show them how to get into the properties of this, right? And saying that, oh, look, it's supposed to be this IP address is DHCP. We're going to set a static IP address, and we'll walk through giving the IP addresses on this lab. So they want us to set the subnet. So now this is cool. I read this last night, so I'm going to show you all this. For this host IP, use the last valid IP address. They want you to use this mask, and they want you to get, and obviously they're giving the gateway the gateway address of this, and then the address for the DNS server. Okay, so another thing about this lab is the students, if they don't have a really good grasp about subnetting and understanding this is not a standard mask, it's not a classful mask, this is classless. So again, if a student would just be going through this lab by themselves, they would plug these numbers in and just that'd be done. But here's a learning opportunity, right? So let's look at the actual IP addresses that are here. Okay. So what they're saying is to use the last available IP address. Well, how do I know that's the last IP address, right? So at this point, you're going to talk about some subnetting specs, right? So we're saying, look, we're using a 255.255.255.224 mask. That would be a /27 insider notation, right? There's 3 bits for networks. There's 5 bits for hosts, right? So in other words, we're building these networks in series of 32s, right? I use the word magic number. So in reality, we have the 192.168.20.0 network. That would be the first network. Then there's, if you add 32 to that 0, you get 192.168.20.32 network, right? Then if I do it again, 192.168.20.64 network. So I would say, look, so notice how this address here is in between these two networks. So this is network number 1, 2, and 3, right? So this computer that we're working on right here, let me move this over a little bit. This computer we're working on it's in this network, which is going to be the 192.168.20.32 network, right? So what is my usable range? Well, my usable range is going to be from 33 all the way to 62, because 63 is the broadcast address for this network and 64 is the next network. And that explains why these numbers are what they are, right? Why are they telling us to give it the last usable address in the network, right? Well, because the last usable address is 62, which is inside the 32 network, right? So again, another teachable moment. Now we're doing more than just giving this lab a couple IP addresses and getting out of it. Now we're covering subnetting. We're covering alternate ways of getting into the information. So again, very cool stuff, right? Also showing them the router. This is the default gateway to get to the internet. The DNS server is on the other side of this router. Notice these are public addresses. We're using private. Again, look at all this teaching going on. And if you would have just assigned it to the students, they would have never gotten this much information off this one lab. So again, this is the beauty of doing them together and then letting them loose to do it on their own. Okay? Anyway, so there you go. Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to show how do labs. Again, very similar to how I do videos. And if you have any suggestions or any comments, please let us know. Contact TestOut. And I hope you found this video useful. And good luck. I know it's a lot.